The report is called Setting the Record Straight because the government of South Sudan wanted to put on the record what actually happened and the pressure that they were under after the two coup attempts, one in 2013, one in 2016, that forced them into peace agreements that set a structure for their society that has caused great problems and difficulty in a state that was trying to develop itself and create its new structures for the future. The big problem was that the government was forced into peace negotiations by the international community, in respect of which the other side, that is the SPLM in opposition led by Riek Machar, that had been responsible for the two attempted coups, was able to manipulate the negotiations of the peace agreement by holding out for more and more and causing the structure that the government wanted, by which it wanted to run its country, to be weakened further and further at each stage that Machar resisted the points that the government wanted to uphold. We examined the role of the international community in the negotiations, particularly the role of the United Nations, the role of IGAD, and the role of the Troika, and how the various interests of those groups were developed to ensure that South Sudan, its government, was placed in a position whereby it had to agree the terms that were being put to it by those who were going to be responsible for assisting it in building its capacity to develop the country. Despite the peace agreements, the conflicts were ongoing, and the party responsible for the conflict with the government was, of course, the opposition, and it was fostering its own war whilst at the same time sitting in government. That's a very, very difficult situation for a state to have to deal with. You can only govern when there's trust between those ministers and departments that are meant to be working together. So the whole experiment, if you like, of putting two parties together in the context of a conflict and expecting them to run a country, or expecting the government to run a country, was doomed to be difficult and a failure. In addition to the politics, we examine the role of the militia in South Sudan. The militia have traditionally existed within southern Sudan in an informal way, in that they were groups of men who either took revenge on other villagers, other locations, or sought to establish themselves in more fertile lands to take over the agriculture. And this has been a problem in these conflicts because, harnessed with the opposition forces, the government has had a big problem in trying to suppress these militia, which are at the same time being controlled by military forces. When interventions have taken place, this, of course, then causes the international community to complain about the conflict, but the government is trying to suppress conflict. The government feel that there has been a complete lack of understanding of their needs and their role in trying to prevent these groups of militia from causing the abuses, serious abuses of human rights that take place. So despite this background, there have been positives, there have been pluses that the government has been able to achieve. With the assistance of UNMISS, there have been mobile courts that have been introduced that bring justice outside Juba into the local communities in circumstances where it has been very difficult for justice to prevail. Notably, the military justice system has taken these mobile courts themselves and conducted a lot of hearings of cases of military personnel that have committed crimes and human rights abuses and required punishment. That was only possible because the courts were able to travel out into these areas of conflict and dispense justice. The most difficult matter to achieve has been the unification of forces. And that now is able to be viewed as a success. In August 2022, the parade before the new commander-in-chief of the unified forces, President Salva Kiir, took place. And it was a remarkable achievement because you've had two groups of military forces who've been at war and in conflict now having been trained at joining together. So setting the record straight, attempts to correct the narratives that have been put out by the international community and others concerning events in South Sudan and reasons why those events have taken place. It's been a great problem for the South Sudanese government that whenever there is conflict, be it by militia groups or be it by opposition forces, it is either turned to as having been responsible for the conflict or failing to suppress the conflict. But when it tries to suppress the conflict, it of course comes into criticism for having taken part in a conflict. And we get these rather circular reports being issued by the international agencies that fail to take into account what is really going on and the context in which the government has to operate.